So welcome to this week's episode of Leaders on a Mission, where I'm joined by inspiring leaders driven by the impact of creating a healthy and sustainable world. And in today's episode, I'm joined by Adam Anders. Adam works as co-founder and partner of Anterra, a premier venture fund that backs entrepreneurs building a healthier food system. Now, as a professional people watcher, attending the World AgTech a few weeks ago, I love watching Adam in action, full of purpose and energy. And Adam, listen, I know how busy you are, but super appreciate you giving me the time to come on the show today.
Thanks very much for inviting me on, Simon.
Pleasure. So I tell you what I'd like to do. I'd like to take it all the way back with you. And I'd just like to understand, early upbringing, or, talk through some of the kind of key forces that really kind of help shape some of your kind of key influences, as it were.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up on a farm, and that's where the original connection with agriculture and to some extent AgTech begins. My father also had a farm machinery dealership. He was Massey Ferguson Dealer of the Year in Australia, Salesperson of the Year in Australia. A watch that he got for that is still actually at home in the cupboard. And another one of his trophies as a Massey Ferguson salesman is in the other meeting room, 10 meters that way. As chance would have it, and it is chance on this occasion, I started a company at university called AgTech Proprietary Limited. It still exists, but I didn't anticipate a career in venture capital. That was just I bought and sold some tractors, perhaps following in my father's footsteps. And then that company stood idle until my father used it for something else over the previous 30 years. It's nice to have the name there, though, so I keep it registered for that reason.
Amazing. It's like a comeback full circle.
Exactly. As if I knew this was, somebody knew this was my destiny. I just didn't, I didn't even equate AgTech with venture capital and the transformation or the job that I'm doing now.
Yeah, I mean, so you're talking about kind of when you set the company up from university, kind of, how many years ago was that?
That's must have been 89 or 90.
Right, wow. Probably
go back to the registration records for AgTech Proprietary Limited, and I'll be proved right or wrong. But I was only at university for 5 years, so that's in that window.
Great. Okay. Oh, wow. And so tell me a little bit about, before you got to where you are now, you were, interesting journey, I think, from law. There was some management consulting. You spent some time with Virgin Music. Just run through the kind of journey to where you get to now.
So the first big step out of the rural area, town of 800 people, Freeling, was to the big city of Adelaide. And the next big step from there was to study in England. I think that's when I realized there was a broader world out there beyond farming and the district I'd grown up in. And I'm very excited about that. I did some management consulting from there into a fintech startup, excuse me, a company called AccuCard, where I was one of the early employees. And look, we sold that relatively quickly to Lloyd's TSB, and that journey of being venture capital backed and disruptor technology company certainly caught my attention. I have to say the bit about that I wasn't sure about is its first product, this fintech business, was a credit card. I wasn't sure the world needed more credit cards, but it was early days. And from there, I returned to Australia, dabbling in a few other tech or early stage businesses, and settled in a buyout. One was a business owned by the family office of the private equity house of Brett Blundy. That was the Virgin Music Group, where I was the chief marketing officer. A great job, 38% of Australia's music. And from there into another passion, which is barbecuing, where I led the buyout as a young man of Barbecues Galore, which was NASDAQ listed. And a buyout house in Australia was on that journey with me. And in the end, I stayed on in that business for a while, but joined the buyout firm after a couple of years in that role. And that's when I switched to call it the dark side of investing. Married a Dutch woman, moved to the Netherlands, wanted to get closer to impact and closer to entrepreneurs in tech. And as I joined Rabobank as the deputy head of their private equity group, that was my focus. And that's a big division, just under 2 billion of investments across many classes, world's largest food and ag bank. And that's when all of these worlds came together. That's when the concept of doing food and agriculture, reconnecting with farmers, the impact of what would happen in food and ag if we improved it, and the desperate statistical, for us, we saw a clear statistical case, well, a reasonable statistical case for why we were going to need innovation to create a safer, more secure, more sustainable food system. And we presented that data in, I think the first time was April 12 to the Rabobank board. And alongside it was the thesis that every other major chunk of GDP had been transformed by a venture capital backed tech transformation. And we thought that food and ag was next, not either because it was going to happen anyway, or because there was this need for change. So two pillars that complement each other, but you could believe either of them and still get to the same answer, which is you should do this. And thankfully, Rabobank and Fidelity were our initial backers who did do it. And that's how we got here.
Amazing, amazing. Tell me though, you spoke about meeting your wife and coming. Where did you meet your wife, for instance? And then what?
I met her in Chile before I started the management consulting job, just at a language course while backpacking.
Right.
And then we bumped back into each other 2 more times around the world. She was working for the World Bank, passionate about the early stages of carbon trading there, when it was properly legislated and legitimate. So I think the first fund out of the World Bank, she was a team member of that. And she moved around a bit and I moved around a bit. And then we found each other again in London several years later. Then she came to Sydney with me and then talked me into coming here to Amsterdam.
Amazing. I love some of, how the jigsaw of life, for instance. And, I know Rabobank, they're called like the farmers bank, aren't they, really? Did you feel that going to Rabobank and having the heavy influence in agriculture at that time really kind of shaped, that thesis and that understanding? I'm wondering if you were somewhere else, to work somewhere else, would you have ended up in this path?
I wish I could say that I would have found food and ag tech anyway. The intuition I had was that clean tech was going to be the go. And in actual fact, as part of the job with Rabobank, I was going to be supervising 2 separate clean tech funds, one project equity and one venture capital. And that was my belief. And that's where I thought my attention was going to be turning as I departed from later stage investing and moved into impact. And of course, I arrived at the world's largest food and ag bank, and this flood of memories of being on the farm, of the plight of the farmer, and the numbers start coming in. Rabobank's got 90 food and agriculture research people. So not equity analysts, research people, which I think is the second largest research group in the world after the FAO. I think it's bigger than the USDA, or maybe it's smaller. It's third largest, but it's in that magnitude, right, of pure research people focused on food and ag. And with the data set that was available and the relationships, we pivoted very quickly from clean tech to food and ag tech. And this was around about the same time that the global financial crisis and the debt sense was underway. So it was an easy time to step away from Gen 1 clean tech. Was so capital intensive, it got punished in that in that debt crisis. And so, we were also caught with opportunity, some allocated funds to venture capital and impact, where we could go back to the bank and say, well, it's great that you're interested in clean tech, but isn't this closer to your core and an even better idea? And that's how it started.
Oh, great. Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about the fund, the areas that you specialize in, and
sure.
Yeah, we'll go from there.
So from a technology perspective, 2 technology pillars, digital and biotech. From a value chain perspective, across the value chain. So that's everything from genetics, for digital would be bioinformatics, and then traditional genetics. Then on, perhaps let's do them separately, digital then moving forward on farm, how the inputs get there, potentially agronomic advice, although tough area. Lots of fascinating stuff happening as the produce or the farming product leaves the farm, with hedging, insurance, fintech, transparency of pricing, source information, leveraging additional value from special attributes, be it via regenerative farming or carbon reduced farming or organic or just farmer identity. And then into optimizing the production process. As you get closer to the consumer, you get the different delivery logistics models kicking in. And, technically we could cover the last mile, but practically, A, other people covered it long ago, and B, I think other funds have a different expertise that probably means that absolute last mile is better placed in their sweet spot than ours. And then on biotech, similar journey, onto the farm, better ag inputs, microbials, biologicals, or just the next generation of more precise, more environmentally friendly, but still effective and low-cost small molecules. Onto biotech in the production process, specialty ingredients, alternative proteins would slot in there. And then onto medicinal food when you get to the consumer end, but also looking at dietary practices, allergens, and similarly, by the way, optimizing digitally for climate footprint of what you eat and allergens and dietary interests also would be a reasonable and an interesting area for digital investment for us. So that's a value chain and a technology perspective.
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, thank you. And so tell me a little bit about, like, for you, that I'm picturing you back in 2012 when you found, you were looking at the kind of data, you were making the business case for it, as it were. Tell me a little bit about the kind of why, really, the impact, and what problems you're really trying to solve, as it were.
Yeah. In one sense, I opened that presentation the other day, and it's stunning how little has changed. But in another sense, a bunch of it was data that we strapped together and concept slides. And so, or data that was 10 years old and we were presenting it in 2012, just sort of hoping that it was still directionally correct, right? You had the basic supply and demand, where you had population growth plus people moving to a more animal protein intense diet, just leading directly to more food than yield improvement could keep up with, right? And then you had the opportunity to bring a huge amount of additional land online, but the cost of that versus the waste in the value chain seemed like a poor idea to us. And then you had these headwinds of climate change decreasing yield improvement, as in you still had a steady yield improvement, but it was sub 2.5% per annum. Whereas we'd gone through a green revolution where it was really high, really strong, and it's not keeping up. And that trend is remaining the same because we've overused some net short-term, very powerful and helpful chemicals and processes, but in the long term, in terms of soil health and productivity, not. Or we'd focused on yield output per square meter instead of productivity, which should include all inputs versus outputs and should have an environmental factor, right? And so we looked at all of that and said, this is the problem set. And then in the background, you had just a pure human health angle, which is what are the causes of death, what are the causes of illness, and obesity, heart disease, diabetes were already high up back then. And 10 years on, that data has become more substantiated. Unfortunately, it's also become more critical.
Yeah, absolutely. Have there been any other changes to the business case at all? Is there anything else, like where we are now, 2022, that you would kind of add on if you were writing that slide deck now?
Yeah, there've been quite a few. The massive disruptions to the food system, COVID, and also things like a war in the Ukraine, where 30% of the world's wheat is coming from Russia and Ukraine, and a similar percentage of farmed oils. And you just see the disruption of having to source from different places, deliver in different formats straight to household, or just take out in a step such a huge chunk of the food system. And you realize it's time to be more nimble. And if I'd known that in advance, we could have invested it was difficult investing and optimizing the middle of the value chain just 3 years ago, just 2.5 years ago, whereas now it's opened up. Traditional players running on thin margin, not wanting to digitalize, but not wanting to change anything, are now very keen to change. So I wish we'd backed that thesis heavier earlier. We didn't see alternative proteins coming. We saw people eating more vegetables, but we didn't see a sort of meat substitute in 2012. I don't think that was in the document. We didn't see a huge lift in indoor farming. So I don't think that was in that document. Trying to think of what else was not there. Probably the other big things were there. And directionally, both were there in the sense that we were looking for more efficient ways of farming, and we were looking for ways where people's diet would be, or solutions that would provide a more climate-friendly outcome, right? But just interesting where some big things popped up. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. And for you though, like in terms of being an impact investor, how different is that? You know, I mean, you've been on other sides of the fence and been involved with lots of different industries. What, you know, you do this day to day now, for instance. Talk to me a little bit about the resonation of, you know,
So, we look at Anterra, we're very careful in how we also even position ourselves as an impact investor. We think that if you're investing in food and agriculture, everything you do should be better for the environment and better for people's health. And that's not something you don't have to sacrifice anything for that. In fact, it's common sense, right? And so we have to back companies that are going to deliver a good financial return to our investors. We could be a not-for-profit, but we're not. So as one of the pioneers, I think it's vitally important that we deliver returns and therefore keep this dream, but also the solutions open and broaden this investment base. So for-profit is really important to our impact thesis, right? And along the way, we just wouldn't do anything that's harmful. In fact, the more it can address issues like climate change or obesity or general nutrition, it's just a better investment. And it's a lot more fun to work on, and you get a lot more energized teams and you recruit people much faster. And there's a whole bunch of other benefits hanging off the edge that I think I didn't foresee that in 2012. I didn't realize the number of the younger generation that would just jump onto these opportunities as an alternative to being an investment banker or a management consultant or having perhaps a higher salary. So that's been also another surprise.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's great. That's great. And tell me a little bit about the look, back in 2012, you would have been one of the first funds, right?
We didn't have the fund in 2012. We first presented it then.
Right. Yeah.
And it took a full 2 years before it's January 14 before we actually can put up a banner or a website that says Anterra, right?
Yeah.
There's a gap between a conceptual document and first day of trading, so to speak.
Right. Tell me though, on that journey from 12 with the idea and the thesis to now, what's been the most difficult or the most challenging aspect of that whole journey?
God, there's been so many challenges. So when we first started, we coming out of the Netherlands, the initial cornerstone piece from Rabobank, global bank, but well and truly Dutch in its core. We had an initial preferred Benelux focus from that investor with Fidelity interested in global. It was at the initial fund 50 million. We got the first data from AgFunder, the first publisher of data, at the end, sometime in 2014. The global market for food and AgTech investing, according to the data they had that year, was 360 million. We had 20% global market share with a regional focus, right? And that's a disastrous strategy. And our early investments, we were struggling to find really good, innovative, transformative companies with great entrepreneurs. And it's not surprising when you realize that we were wandering around the place with 20% market share in a market with 1% global market share. We were 20 times bigger than the market, and quickly set up a US office. Also you couldn't apply the traditional rules of venture capital because there wasn't a vibrant set of entrepreneurs. So you are either backing entrepreneurs with no context in food and ag, or people with a huge food and ag context but no experience in high growth venture tech disruption. And you know, both of those things have matured beautifully. We now have top tier entrepreneurs that understand our ecosystem, or you can so much better put together teams that combine both. And the funding base, I mean, we were the lead investor in everything we did almost. And, you know, if you're not a very big fund, that's a precarious position to be in. The business is doing brilliantly, but might want bridge funding, and everyone just turns and looks at person in one seat. That's not, even with a great company, that's not a great feeling, right? Because you just want that depth of capital, but you also want that depth of experience in the board so that different experienced team members come up with different solutions. That's blossomed. I mean, there's not only several strong food and ag tech funds, but there's also a lot of generalists with really complementary skills that have come into our market.
Great. Yeah, it's been some journey, isn't it? It really has.
Yes.
Been. Yeah. And where about, so tell me a little bit around, you know, the support you help entrepreneurs and the work that you do. You know, clearly you're investing, but you're investing so early, right? It's how do you help the companies on the trajectory?
So one of the big benefits of being a specialist fund is that we have a wealth of data on many of these aspects of the agricultural and food system. We have C-level relationships after this many years with just about all of the big food and agriculture companies. We also know a lot of their former employees and people that are just passionate about changing our food system, and technology leaders in other sectors that are dabbling in our sector. So you bring all those, you bring that knowledge and those people together to help the company. And, you know, broadly speaking, two ways: decrease risk by providing some insight, and hopefully increase revenue by introducing some great leads, which you can start doing during due diligence, hopefully. And you know, finally, there's the job that the traditional VC does, which is good board governance, access to capital, access to other investors, help with recruiting, technology network, right? So it's traditional VC plus the deep context.
Yeah, got it. I wasn't sure if you sit on, but you take kind of board positions of the portfolio companies yourself, actually.
Yeah, no, we do. We're on the board or in the boardroom as an observer, I think, for every company in our portfolio.
Yeah, okay. All right, no, great. Absolutely. And so when we think about the future and we think about the challenges out there, right, with the, you know, we've outlined some real challenges for the food, for climate, for the environment. What kind of impact do you think AgTech can have, like longer term, you know, when it comes to reversing some of those trends, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the single biggest opportunity we have. Transfer of best practice in food and agriculture is not going to get us anywhere, right? That will get us more calories, but the way we've been producing those calories and the sheer nature of those calories, like too much corn, we could do with less soy. And this is not the answer. We need more nutritious food, grown in a more sustainable way, taking into account all productivity, including impact on the environment. And so that solution is going to come from everything from better genetics, be it climate resistant or just healthier, to better ag inputs, more environmentally friendly, more effective, more targeted, to more efficient through the value chain, less waste, to allowing people to understand their own needs from a dietary nutrition perspective, perhaps tailored to the individual, perhaps tailored to taste, but hopefully with the right information available and a fun interface, something that our children really engage on in, both in terms of their own health, but also their own carbon footprint. Yeah,
absolutely. The question is, do we have enough time, basically?
I mean, it feels critical right now. It feels more critical now than it has in any other time when I've been on this journey and I've been on this earth. So to that extent, it feels dangerous. Do I have faith in innovation? Yes. So I think we'll get there, but I think we're already leaving a pretty dark mark that will at least make the immediate next generation. Unfortunately, I don't think they're going to have quite the glory run that my wife and I had, but I don't think we're going to leave them without a solution. And I think technology is going to be a critical part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Yeah. Have you seen a change over those, the last 10 years when you think about some of the big players out there, the big strategics that have got the footprint? Have you really seen much of a different attitude towards embracing innovation from these guys?
But innovation, 100%. I mean, they've gone from, looking at our PowerPoint deck, genuinely looking us in the eye if we were lucky enough to organize a meeting, and genuinely saying, interesting, but with absolutely no follow-up. Right? I mean, follow-up email barely responded to, gets kicked down the can 5 times until somebody maybe takes a cursory phone call out of politeness after having, met with the CEO and the board member and maybe the head of sustainability, if they had one back then, or maybe the head of innovation. Now I think all of the food and agriculture majors have an innovation strategy, an open innovation strategy, a presence at these major conferences, an interest in how to work with entrepreneurs, a respect for the fact that entrepreneurs might disrupt what they're doing. And in terms of hard changes, though, I think we have to be realistic. We have not seen that yet, right? We have not seen the ag tech or food tech, maybe in food tech more, definitely in food tech more, companies that are just truly disrupted, right? In ag tech, we see the beginnings, these companies both raising large amounts of capital and starting to really bite the heels of the majors, but not transformative yet. And in food tech, look, if you count last mile delivery, if you count the fact that all of this food made it to homes during COVID, well, that's a major disruption. And e-commerce, little bit, what's the right word, incremental as opposed to transformative, but it's definitely a change that's bounced forward. 15-minute delivery, if you think that's a sustainable development or not, I'm not sure, but certainly a massive convenience one. So a bit more evidence and a lot more equity capital both raised and returned to investors later down the value chain so far.
Yeah. And what are your thoughts on AgTech for that in terms of, the next, well, when you look at the landscape for AgTech now, for instance, well, what's your view in terms of the future for some of these early stage companies and what they can expect?
So the attention is increasingly upstream. The problems are more difficult. The process is a smidgen slower. That creates, I think, once again, an important role for the specialist, but also some fascinating opportunities. And let's face it, entrepreneurs, the private equity industry took a while to work its way to more problematic cyclical areas. I mean, they wouldn't even touch luxury goods 10 years ago, and now they own a big chunk of luxury goods, right? And I think we're going to see them moving, and they've also gone massively into software generally. So I think we're going to see the flow of capital. I also think we're going to see the successes financially. And that's going to come, hopefully, with a tremendous positive impact.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. No, thank you. And what do you think, what's great working with these early stage companies, right? The mission and the heart and the teams coming together. It's just nothing like it. It's just like, it's just quite unique, isn't it? It feels like that. What are the biggest challenges these companies face right now in taking that step, would you say?
In food tech and ag tech, or just generally?
Yeah. No, food tech and ag tech.
Simple, powerful, well-communicated value proposition. I think we still often see technologies looking for a solution, or brilliant technologies that aren't quite immediately actionable for the user. I think that's most acute on farm, where a brilliant amount of data and a little bit of advice is not yet a tremendous and obvious return on investment for the farmer. So it's just that tipping point of when either the answer is there, but it's not communicated in an actionable enough way, or the answer is not quite accurate enough to be truly actionable for the right outcome. I think that's a major focus area, it's a major point that we continually see being a problem in food and ag. I think it's a good enough pausing point. I mean, the rest of it becomes quite generic. You want great teams addressing high growth areas with capital efficient businesses. I mean, this stuff any venture capitalist could say.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you. Listen, that's great. I've just got a few quick fire questions for you just to finish off with. Just some great advice you've received.
I think I was early in my investing career when I was struggling with the breadth of opportunities that we were looking at a generous firm. And it just wasn't capturing my attention with the late nights. And I had a chat to a mentor about just getting back to what I'm actually passionate about. And I think, of course, there are moments when you have to deliver food on the table, and there are moments when you have to make sacrifices, but keeping close to your core and keeping to where your passion is a tremendous way to enjoy the days, even when some of them are tough. So that's the best advice.
Great. What about a leader you've been inspired by?
I've been around some great leaders because I chose to enter a good chunk of my working life as an investor. It's often been a CEO that we're advising or watching other great board members. I think that stepping back, barbecues galore days, there was a mentor, part-time executive chairman, Jonathan Pinshaw, who'd been a pioneer in retail in Australia on several major listed boards, but just a very thoughtful person who could lift the conversation to 40,000 feet, but he could also bring practical advice to me, then in a leadership position in the company, on how to better manage the team, how to communicate clearly, and just a very gentle and endearing person, but absolutely firm. Like, tough news was always capable of being communicated.
Yeah. Okay, great. And how much of, where did that inspiration, working with that and seeing some of those qualities, what were you able to kind of take from that in your own career?
Oh, gosh. Hopefully a chunk of it. I mean, I'm doing something I'm passionate about. On the Jonathan Pinshaw side, I do try to be crystal clear with advice, but I try about my opinion, but I try to couch it in a way that is respectful, structured, leaves whoever I'm working with plenty of room to grow and make their own conclusion. I try to be able to move from the detail, but back up to the 40,000 feet and see the bigger picture. So yeah. I like to think I've applied all of it where I can.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a tough, if you want to be as good as some of these people that I bumped into, that's a very tough ask, but it's nice to reference back to your best experience with good people.
Yeah. Okay. And what causes you stress and how do you switch off from it?
Stress. It's always stressful when you're backing venture-backed, early stage cash flow negative businesses, when they're close to not having capital at the time they need it, either because of a shock or a delayed financing. That's a sleepless night. It happens actually to even sometimes the best of companies, but it causes stress, no doubt. I think the other thing is, you do accidentally end up in caustic situations, and that is, it's so draining. So I do have a policy of not purposely entering any caustic relationships. If I see shareholder fights, management team fights, I'm past that. I don't want to push through it because I think it damages whole organizations, but I still accidentally sometimes end up in the odd one.
Yeah. And how do you switch off from that? What's
favorite things?
Barbecues.
Family, barbecuing and surfing. We're in the Netherlands. I don't get to go surfing very often, but at least barbecuing and surfing are close. Sorry, barbecuing and family are close. Okay,
cool. I just wondered, like, on your personal life, I could just picturing you just at a weekend, I see you at the conferences, so high energy and excitable, enthusiastic. And is that you like weekends as well?
Yes, there's a collapsing point as well where I can be spectacularly lazy if there's an opportunity to watch a good film with the family. So on the weekends, I can boost from the same level of energy and 10 things in a day to just absolutely stop. So perhaps you don't see the 100% stop at the conference. That happens at the end of the day when I collapse.
Yeah, great. And what do you think? What do you enjoy most? The single best thing about your job?
Oh, working with young people who believe in technology with a big vision, that's just extraordinary. And when that big vision is not just about disrupting a generic part of our lives, but is actually improving our food system, and then I think I'm the luckiest, got the best job in the world.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I can relate to that. And Adam, listen, it's been a wonderful conversation. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks very much for taking the time. Enjoyed talking with you, Simon, and all the very best.
Thank you very much. Thank you.